Most people don't even consciously choose these trade-offs. They drift into them. You can ask yourself, do you need to take more calculated risk if the plan that you've got isn't going to get you there by the time that you're hoping for? Sometimes we can be our own worst critic and our own biggest doubter because those things haven't yet shown up. That's why you just got to trust in the process.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth Property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management, sales and buyers agency servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here's your host, Jared Mann.
G'day and welcome to Perth Property Insider. I'm your host, Jared Mann. And today I've got a bit more of a personal chat to have with you. I'm asking the question, what would you actually trade for life-changing wealth? Lately, I've covered so many topics, data related and research related and market related, but I wanted to go back to the inside and think about what is really going to make a difference, because you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't get some of this inside stuff right and your daily habits and things that you do to create the wealth right, you'll never end up making this leap to creating life-changing wealth. So I'm not asking, what would you like to have in terms of money and wealth? I'm not asking, what do you dream about having? Because plenty of people have dreams, but they're not always grounded in reality and they've got no actual means of getting there. What I'm asking is, what would you actually trade in your life at the moment to get life-changing wealth? Because whether you admit it or not, we're all trading something, and we only have two real limited resources in life. We've got our time and we've got our money, and that's it. So time can be spent learning, working, building wealth, exercising. It can be spent with family, with friends, on hobbies, on entertainment, or it can be wasted. And money can be invested into wealth creation or into experiences or into comfort or into status or into things that depreciate and disappear. Every day, consciously or unconsciously, you're actually allocating to both of these areas of where you're investing or spending or wasting your money, and where you're investing or spending or wasting your time. And those allocations ultimately determine your future. So let's take a look at the power of early trade-offs. So here's what most people underestimate. The compounding effect of time is incredibly powerful. And even small amounts of time and money invested early when you're young or younger add an extra decade or two to that power of and time to compound. So it makes a massive difference to where you end up later down the track if you start earlier. Absolutely massive. So I've seen people try to invest aggressively late in life, and it's incredibly difficult to catch up to someone who started small but started early. And compounding doesn't just apply to money, it applies to skills, to knowledge, to your habits, to confidence, to networks, and to your health. So the earlier you start building in any of those areas, the more unfair the advantage becomes. So the real question isn't, how do I get rich quickly? The real question should be, what am I willing to consistently trade now so compounding works for me later? Because everything ultimately is this trade-off. So now let's take a look at, how do we be conscious of what we're trading off? Because most people don't even consciously choose these trade-offs. They drift into them. They trade discipline for comfort along the way. They trade learning for entertainment. They trade investing for lifestyle upgrades, or they trade focus ultimately on their goals and all those positive things they could be doing. They trade that with distraction. And then 10 to 20 years later, they wonder why their results don't match their potential. And that's why I'm such an advocate of having a strategic portfolio plan whenever you do head off on trying to create wealth, because a good strategy will show you, if I invest this much along the way, this is what I'm likely to end up with. And then you can ask yourself, is that enough? Am I going to create enough by the goal age that I have in mind? And that doesn't have to be retirement. It can be setting yourself up for more choices at an earlier age. I don't even believe in retirement. I more believe in having choices and being able to do what you want to do when you want to do it. So is that enough that you've created? And is it worth the inputs that you'll have to make along the way to get to that? You can actually weigh up that trade-off by seeing the future projections. Or do I need to pull more levers? Do I need to increase my income to try to get, more invested sooner and be able to get a higher borrowing capacity sooner? When you know the levers to pull, you can really put some effort into doing it. And it was fabulous to see one couple I was working with recently on a strategic portfolio plan. I spoke to them 6 months ago. They saw that they needed to increase those levers. A lot of people just disappear and might be disheartened. These guys went off, focused on getting pay rises, focused on increasing their income, came back with a much healthier and bigger borrowing capacity, more ability to increase their savings, and they were able to invest much earlier than they otherwise would have, and they were able to buy a much more quality asset and still have the money left aside for their lifestyle and their other savings. So you can also ask yourself, do you need to take more calculated risk if the plan that you've got isn't going to get you there by the time that you're hoping for? Do you need to readjust your future goals and make them more modest and see how you can live on less? And I'd prefer you to be increasing your goals and living on having more to have more choices with. But seeing that future and working backwards can actually help you work out, are those trade-offs along the way worth it? Is it worth increasing your savings and putting that towards your investing and to get that extra property sooner, to have more choices later? So when you can see that future trajectory, your trade-offs become intentional, and intentional trade-offs are really powerful. Now I want to take a look at what I call the fragile middle. Now, here's where it gets hard, because when you start investing time or money in a new direction, especially wealth creation, you'll almost always have those well-meaning people around you that discourage you. They're not trying to do it. It's not because they're bad people, but it's because change is uncomfortable for anyone. And often it's the people wasting the most time who actually have the most time to comment on what you're doing. It's the trolls that go around and pay out on the haters because they're not learning or listening to a podcast in their spare time. They're trolling online and wasting time and throwing, insults and other things out there. Likewise, in your personal circles, if someone sees you trying to get ahead, sees you starting to do something, they make it more about themselves than about you. And it can be very discouraging. They can be very discouraging on why that's not going to work because it hasn't worked for them. So they're not necessarily discouraging your future results. They're reacting to your new behavior. And here's the dangerous part. There's always a gap between new actions and visible results. So that gap is really fragile. It's uncomfortable, it's uncertain, and it's when doubt creeps in because you don't yet have the results to go back and show them and say, hey, I'm proving you wrong. Look at this wealth I've created. It takes some time. So between your initial intention to create the wealth and it showing up, that's where you can easily get discouraged by the people around you because you haven't yet had that positive feedback loop. You haven't had the proof to go back to them with. You haven't yet justified the sacrifice that you're making. And sometimes we can be our own worst critic and our own biggest doubter because those things haven't yet shown up. That's why you just got to trust in the process. But I'm going to go into some other ways to have the confidence in a minute to really forge ahead. But once those first results do show up, it's addictive. Momentum builds, confidence builds, your identity shifts, which is the exciting thing. That's why I love being involved in how people create wealth, because it's never just about the wealth. It's about all that underlying essence of you, the confidence that you gain, the identity that you have of being a wealthy person. That has to all change. So for me, as I became more successful, I developed the ability to ignore the noise. I had to let go of some of my friendships, and I had to distance myself from environments that weren't aligned with those new goals and that new identity that I was trying to create. And I built the ability to invest time and money for long periods without ever needing those immediate results to show. And I think as I've gotten more patient and older, I'm able to go even longer and longer without any results, just with that larger picture and that longer term focus in mind. So it wasn't necessarily about patience, though. It was more about stubborn persistence for me. And before I ever took advice from someone, I'd ask one question. Do I want their life? Do I want the life that this person has who is trying to give me advice? And if I answer no to that immediately, then I'm very skeptical and very careful about taking advice from that person. So if the answer was no, I'd usually stop listening and I'd try to find the other right people to listen to. And that sort of helped me turn off the noise of the people around me, the well-meaning people, and even my parents to a certain extent, doubters originally, but then saw how serious and focused I was on it. And you just have to ignore a bit of that well-meaning advice around you because you don't necessarily want their life. So why would you take advice from them? Now I want to go into some of the hidden costs of wealth that not everyone thinks about. Let's talk about something people don't ever say aloud. There's a trade-off to everything. You say you want to be wealthy, but wealth requires time, effort, discipline, responsibility. Owning assets adds complexity. And if they're not managed well, they create stress. That's why having a really great property manager at the core, such as someone from my team, really removes one of those other big problems to gaining wealth. A lot of people get one property they buy as a landlord, they get the wrong property manager, they get all the stress that comes from it. You get some bad tenants in there, trash the house, have vacancy. This investing's all too stressful. They tap out, might only sell, within 5 years, and they don't go on to owning multiple properties because they associate it with work. But it does have extra complexity regardless of how good your property manager is. So you have to understand that there's a bit of a trade-off with that. Everything's not always going to go smoothly, and you have to put some energy and input in order to get that wealth out. So having assets does consume time. It can create headaches, and money doesn't fix your weaknesses too. So money actually amplifies any weaknesses that you have. So if your foundation isn't solid emotionally, financially, and structurally, money is going to expose that. And it can be an incredible path for personal development, or it can strip away everything until you learn the lesson. And I've learned a lot of lessons over the years to manage my money more tightly, to have those great experts and property managers and people around me to be willing to pay the money for the expert to short circuit things. And that's why the foundation matters a lot. And if you don't get that right before building great wealth, then it can all sort of come crashing down and mean that you're not yet ready for the money. And that's why when a lottery winner often has that big payday, they divest themselves of the money within a few short years and end up with no friends as well, because they haven't known how to handle it all emotionally and financially.
Just real quick before we continue on with the episode, are you getting my email updates yet? If you're not, you're missing out on our suburb intelligence reports, which we tailor and prepare for your individual suburbs of interest, showing advanced stats and insights. Must get onto those. And I also send out exclusive invitations to our events, including webinars, sundowners, and workshops. So if you're not getting those, head on over to investorsedge.com.au/join and make sure you're receiving my email updates.
So now I want to go into the myth of balance. We love this idea of being everything: fit, healthy, wealthy, and happy. It's really the top 4 things that if we get those things right in life, we're going to have an amazing life. And why shouldn't we want it all? But my observation is that less than 20% of people have success in even one of these areas. And that mathematically means the percentage who are successful across all of them is, super tiny. And it's exceptionally rare to have success across all 4 of these areas. So being exceptional is rare. And why would you take advice from the majority if you want an exceptional life? If you want to be that exception, you have to get comfortable being different. You're going to have different routines. You're going to have different conversations. You're going to have different priorities than what the majority have in all of these areas. If you go and copy what 80% of the people do, you're going to end up with the same result as them. And here's something most people don't want to hear. It's incredibly difficult, maybe impossible, to actually be balanced and highly successful across all areas from the outset. I've never met anyone who did it that way so far, that just straight out of the gate went and built all these areas in absolute balance and didn't end up trading off 1, 2, or 3 areas first to gain success in a single area. That's because it probably is impossible. I've never met anyone who did it that way. And in my experience, the energy required to actually break through your own habits and limitations in any one of these areas is so intense that focus almost always comes at the expense of something else. And you have to trade off to put the extra energy in to that one area you're trying to improve to break through. So once momentum's actually built in that area, once you've got some success going, once you've got your systems and your habits in place, then you can diversify your energy into improving and growing the other areas. But in the beginning, concentration for me beats balance, and it's the only path that I've been able to take and what I've seen with other successful entrepreneurs, investors. So now let's take a look at some of the leverage and shortcuts that you can actually apply to short circuit the journey. You can use experts, you can use advisors, proven models, mentors, and the accountability piece is really important, because if you just left to float on your own, try and do it all on your own, then your progress is going to be a lot slower. And if you don't, where the problem is, and I fully get it, when you're starting out, you don't often have the money yet. So you can't afford that top expert or advisor. You can't get their proven model. You can't add enough value to a mentor that they're going to see value in mentoring you. And you can't pay someone to give you the accountability. So don't kid yourself into thinking that going alone is free. It's not. You'll pay in the time that it takes. You're going to pay in the energy that it takes, being far greater to become successful. You'll pay in the mistakes along the way that you'll have to make yourself. You'll pay in the stress, and you'll pay in the opportunity cost of learning and taking all these wrong turns and making all those mistakes if you had been able to do it better and more optimum from the start, then you'd be in the opportunities earlier. You'd have the time for those good decisions to compound, as we spoke about earlier. And often those mistakes cost far more than the upfront investment would have. So that's where, when you've got the money, it doesn't make sense to not short circuit the path by using those things. And as your income increases, especially for busy professionals and business owners, your time becomes extremely valuable. And at that point, the safer and quicker path is leveraging the money to buy the expertise. But you'll still need enough knowledge to make informed decisions. And that's why I run the podcast, why I still want everyone to know what's being put in front of them, know what makes sense. And that's why when things like our trifecta review, when we give that to someone, it just makes sense because they're informed enough to see that the investment stacks up. Now, every time I've invested in the right expert or mentor, it's produced a return that's many, many times the actual cost. And it's funny because every time I tend to hesitate when doing it, and that time that I hesitate is even less now because I've been through the learning cycle so many times. I've seen that it works. I've seen that putting the money into the right expert always produces that out. But there's still that little moment of pause where I'm like, I could do this myself, but what is my time worth? Can I afford to have that extra stress if it doesn't go right? Can I afford to make the mistakes and end up burning energy, wasting the opportunity cost? And the answer to that's always no. And it's far cheaper to invest with the help of the right expert or advisor. And more importantly, every time I do, it saves me years and it gives me more time for that right choice to compound. So a bit about my journey. I didn't start with money. I started with learning. I didn't have the money initially to put into things. And it was a very long path for me. I spent 6 years reading every property investing book I could get my hands on from the age of 16. I attended countless programs, paid for education. I managed to save up my part-time job work to do that. Back then, going to a course that cost a couple of $1,000s was a massive decision and very hard one when that was all I had. And that was before I bought even my first property. And then I took the gains from my early property investing and I leveraged it into business. And to be honest, I had absolutely no idea how deep the rabbit hole was. This was 18 years ago. When I was 25, I started Investor's Edge, and I quickly worked out that I was in over my head. So I just focused on learning. I paid for coaches. I made mistakes. I kept going. 18 years later, well, about a decade later, I started to get momentum really kick in. And being in the business of property investing, it also gave me another advantage because I could learn from my clients' cycles and mistakes from their decisions that they'd made in property investing. And I could really speed up the learning curve. And it's a real blessing now that I reflect on it that my job also made me great at investing too. When I say great, it gave me the experience. I could learn from all those other people's mistakes. And it's always, there's always more to learn, isn't there? So eventually I had the money to seek out the very best mentors to accelerate my growth. And along the way, family's always been really important to me. So I never traded that off, and I've kept that as a real top priority along with growing wealth. And I kept investing there, but I did lose touch with some of my friendships, and part of me regrets it, and it's a real shame, but the other part of me understands that I couldn't put my energy into everything. Like I said, there was trade-offs. And about 3 to 4 years ago, I looked in the mirror and realized that I'd slowly put on about 20 kilos over the previous decade. Something had to give there. So there's only so much time in your day, in your week. So I used the money that I'd created to accelerate my health and get that back in track. I hired the best coaches, the best trainers, and the best consultants. If you've seen me in person, you'd see that I've lost a lot of weight, and I've built a lot of muscle, and I've reduced my biological age to 10 years younger than my chronological age is. So I'm testing to be early 30s in lots and lots of metrics instead of early 40s. So today I'm the most balanced that I've ever been, but it wasn't always that way. And if you copy the result and how I appear to be from the outside now, without understanding the stages before it, where I sacrificed and put everything into growing my wealth, growing my business, while still at least focusing on my family, but trading off my friends, trading off my health, you'll misunderstand the journey. And I didn't have good balance between all these four all the way along. I had to first get success in one or two of them, and then use the money that I'd gained to fast track and short circuit my path with my health, getting back on track. Unfortunately, there's no short circuit to getting friendships and your network back on track. So I'm still trying in that area and making it a real priority now. And in closing, is it worth it? Well, I come back to the question, what would you trade for life-changing wealth? Is the price of success worth that reward? And for me, it absolutely is, but not just because of the result. Once you get enough money to meet your needs and to, have your dreams and to provide for the other people around you and your immediate family, and then give greater rewards and benefits to your extended family, to your parents, to your charities, that's what gets you to a certain level of, you get to being really satisfied with what you're able to do for others. But beyond that, what's more important once you get to that point is who you've become along the way. It's the discipline that you've gained and the character that you've built, the resilience. Across 2016, 2019, our market was so tough. It felt like I was eating glass for a 3-year period in business. And now that I've come out of that, I'm so much stronger, and I take that forward into all the other situations. Nothing's as hard when you've been through the hardest of times. I've got so much greater clarity because of that journey and that path that I've taken. My standards that I've built across that time, and the responsibility that I can carry on my shoulders, and not feel the weight of it. So wealth is really just a byproduct of all of those things, of who I've become, and growth is the real reward. So be conscious of what you're trading, make it intentional. I'd say build a strategy so that you can see if those trade-offs are worth it. Expect resistance from your own habits, your own headspace, your own self-talk, and the people around you. Get focus on one or two areas before you try to get diversity and balance across all of them. Leverage expertise to get you there if you can afford it. And if you've got enough, I would say, try to get enough money to pay the experts. It'll fast track your journey every time. And most importantly, decide whose life you actually want before you take their advice, because an exceptional life requires exceptional choices, and exceptional choices require conscious trade-offs. So hopefully this has given you a bit of an insight into my path, my journey, and how to go about creating yours. I appreciate you tuning in. If you've enjoyed this episode, like it, share it with friends, pop a comment on YouTube if you're on there, pop a review on iTunes and Spotify. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
Just a reminder, the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. As we don't know your specific situation, you should always seek professional advice before taking any action. For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my property investor update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. I'll see you in the group.